Thank you very much, Felix. Thank you very much for this very interesting talk. Well, it was not an easy journey, I suppose. So now, since, as I told you in the beginning, we have some spare time because Laurent Lévy cannot be with us today. So may I ask the speakers just to come here in the front row here so that we can initiate the discussion, and may I ask also Mike to join the panel. And so now it's time for you to ask questions to any of the three speakers, questions dealing with the presentation or maybe more general questions about translation, but your experience, good or bad experience in similar areas. And so take the opportunity of having these brilliant speakers in very different areas, the in vitro diagnostic, regenerative medicine, and all kind of expertise for Innovate UK. So any question? Yes, please.
Dan Cromlin, Utrecht University, but it used to be IMI and related. A question for Dr. Bott. How do you measure the success of your office? I mean, you will have questions from the government, whatever government it is. Why should we feed you for another year? So how do you measure the success rate? I'm asking that because that question was asked to me all the time. So I'm very curious to hear your experience.
Does this go on? Yeah, that question gets asked every year and more so at budget times. What we did early on was we made sure that if we gave someone a contract, they were on contract for 5 years after the end of the funding, and they had to tell us what they'd done with the funding. And we went back usually 2, 3, 4 and 5 years, depending on how it was going, and asked them, so what have you done? Well, we didn't. We commissioned basically the Judge Business School of Cambridge to go back and do that. And it was they that generated the number of 15 to 20 pounds for every £1 invested in terms of enhanced revenue, because what the Treasury wants is GDP to go up. That means that basically people will be employed and taxes will be paid and their income goes up. So it's an element of faith. That U-shaped curve that I can talk about for 20 minutes if you really want me to, is the answer to the question. We proposed that to the Treasury early on and said, we cannot measure economic growth, but what we can measure is the impact of each project, and we can average out the impact of each project and use that as a proxy for overall economic growth. It's hard work, though, it has to be said.
It would be very helpful if you would publish both the metrics and the outcome.
The metrics are published, they're available on the Innovate UK website. If you put Paycheck, P-A-C-E-C, and Innovate UK into Google, you will find them. They did one in 2010 and then another one in 2011. If you talk to me afterwards, I can help you with the links. But basically, the trick is to get someone who is a proficient economic person to analyse your results and tell the government. They never believe you if you say it. You have to get someone else to say it. The other thing we did, which was really important, was we made sure that the companies that were successful, we captured their stories and published them widely, because there's nothing quite so powerful as people going, if it wasn't for the TSB, we wouldn't exist, and things like that, because that gets into the newspapers, and you know, the politicians do tend to listen to what the media tell them to say.
Yeah, could I add to that? Well, I think what David said is correct, and one of the problems is, of course, people would find this link to this website rather hard to find, but the actual stories of success are much more impact to the politicians who, I guess, are the people. They're not going to find the website and look through the graphs, I suspect, but they will read the stories. I mean, the other thing I see, because I do quite a lot of the other end, do the evaluations, what one is striking to me, again, I haven't been able to quantify it, you probably could, is the quality of the applications year on year gets better. There's a learning process here, and people, each time, the quality of them is improved. When I first started doing this many, many years ago, they were pretty poor, really. But as they're coming up now, they are actually at industry standard, some of them or close to it anyway.
Thank you for your talks. David and Mike, can you please briefly mention some of the success stories that you've had throughout the years? And then afterwards, when you talk to these companies, what do they report as the single most helpful support they got from Innovate UK?
So the answer to the second bit is what they usually value is the information, that it's not the money. For the biomedical catalyst, which is the most relevant thing to this conference, the final phase, where you're getting, I think the biggest grant we gave was about 3 or 4 million. These was to get people into first stage in human trials. And we assembled a panel which consisted of 2 academics, 2 clinicians, 2 business people, and 2 venture capitalists. And they would come in and pitch for 15 minutes what they were trying to do. And almost invariably, people would say, that meeting was more valuable than the money because we learned what to do. The success story, I mean, they're all over the place, but I mean, when we first started Biomedical Catalyst, there was a lot of viruses treating cancers from Cambridge and things like that. You know, you got the bring out your dead scenario early on. One of the most interesting projects I remember was a little thing called Gecko. And basically, you all know what deep vein thrombosis is. Everybody knows it happens on planes, but it also happens to a lot of bed-bound patients. And what this little device does is goes on the back of the knee and stimulates the calf muscles to pump so that you don't get DVTs formed in the legs, which is the most common place to put them. And what the company did, it realized that it could go either the commercial way and sell them, you know, at Heathrow for people on long-haul flights, or it could go into the NHS. So it went down the NHS route on the grounds that that was a validation, and it could then sell it into the market as used in hospitals. And they're making a huge amount of money now. It's a really lovely little device. So, you know, there's all sorts of things came through. You know, I saw order of magnitude 4,000 or 5,000 projects over the time I was there, so I have lots of favourites.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't got much to add. I think endomagnetics is another one in case.
I declare an interest. Eric's a friend. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, I do know him as well. But one also sees really terrible ones as well, of course. And you know, I think one of the worst ones I ever saw was using cadavers as a supply material, and I wouldn't want to be associated with that one really particularly.
So you should be pointing out that Mike is the sort of person we like to have as assessors. We assess the project, then we have monitoring officers, and then we have evaluators at the end of the thing. So, as I said, what companies value much more than the money, although obviously the money is the fuel, is the support and help they get over the process. That's why you know, we said early on, being a funding agency doesn't work. Being an innovation agency means you provide the help for companies, and that's behind the whole translational advisory board of the ETPN.
Yeah, I think what people, I mean, there's lots of idiosyncrasies to the Innovate UK, but I haven't got time to go into that. But it's what information people get back in the boxes, and they often claim it's worth up to £10,000 to them to get that information, which if they had to go and get it as a consultancy, it would cost them that money. And the ability to say, well, this isn't a good project, or probably saves a lot of people millions, really, as well.
Sorry.
It works?
Yeah, it works, okay. Just to come, we have something similar in Ireland as well called Enterprise Ireland, and it's been around for a good number of years. And one of the benefits that both the companies and Ireland as a whole have seen is that Enterprise Ireland, in the same way I guess Innovate UK would act, is that they almost act like a gatekeeper to some of the really good technologies and really good companies. And what they do is they introduce those companies to investors. And so we've done investor programs and so on with Enterprise Ireland, where they've introduced us to some investors over the years. In fact, one of those investors happened to be the one that invested in us. Also, they had a mentor network as well, like you mentioned, and one of the mentors that I accessed through the program became one of our directors, and he's based in California and had a company listed on NASDAQ and so on. But it's, as you say, it's not just the funding, it's access to this network. And on the flip side, we know that some of the investors that have come through into Ireland and invested in these companies have said quite clearly that it was great to have somebody put these companies in front of them, having already checked them. They went through a process first by which they weren't seeing kind of rubbish. They were seeing the really good companies that the country had to offer. So for them, it was also equally good, because it allowed the VCs to come in and just kind of go through a list of really good companies that the country had to offer, and check them off and decide whether they wanted to invest or not. So it was, there's benefits on both sides. And for us, obviously then, for the country, it's an investment in those companies and technologies.
Thank you very much, Vivienne. Any other question? Yes, please.
So to Felix and Vivienne, how many employees do you have in your companies, and how do you find the right people?
We're a small company, much smaller, I would guess, than Felix's. We're 10 people at the moment, and it's really hard to find good people. Even I found we recently hired for an electronic engineering position, and we had people with PhDs coming through, and I insisted that we do a practical test. And our head, our CTO, Dmitry Kashinin, a really smart Russian guy, it's always important to have one of those on your team, said, Vivienne, this guy has a PhD, we don't need to do a practical test. I said, no, we'll definitely do a practical test. And we did, and it was like a traffic light system. Green, really easy, and then it got harder. And one guy couldn't even get past green, and in fact started blaming Dmitry for setting the test in the first place. And we realized then that, even if you do have a PhD, it doesn't mean you're going to work in our company or many other companies. And the quality of some of those that we saw come through was not great. In general, actually, we favor French engineers. They tend to be really, really good. And we have certain kind of criteria that we look at. For us, it's really important that they can fit in a small team and also can work alone, because we very often, I'm not there, I'm here. So that's really important. We tend to go through recruiters now. It's more expensive, but it saves us an awful lot of time and effort. So that's how we tend to find people. But it's difficult. It's not easy to find the right people at all.
Tetec, as the own standing company, has now 70 employees. 70 employees. When I joined Tetec, we were a bit more than 40, and just now 5 years ago. We have an own preclinical development department, so all the preclinical research is done by our own, expecting the animal models. So we have industry partners for doing the animal models. We have an own regulatory department, we have an own clinical development department, and we have our own manufacturing. So we have a full certified GMP environment. But when I told you my story and what we have in our company, you will see that the people are doing, in most of the cases, much more than the obligation from their employment is. So we have the advantage that we can recruit special expertise from our mother company. B. Braun has now 56,000 employees in more than 70 countries in the world. And we have in every department in the different countries specialists and special experience that we can recruit for solving our problems. How to find the right people? I just can support that what you said. It doesn't concern to the education of the people. And it also doesn't concern on the academic grade. That is really not important. It is more the ability of transfer of special experience to solve the problems in an industry framework. I mean, it's no secret when I say in industry it is development in time on money. It is not scientific. It is development of results in time and money. And you need special people who have the enthusiasm, who have the ability, and and finally fits to the team. to solve the problems together. Team is everything. It is everything about the team. Yeah, we have, sometimes we have, especially on the management positions, we have vacancies about 3 years for one position. That is the time we need to find the right people there.
Just to add to Vivienne's point really very briefly, that technical competence one also sees, and it's quite rare, but also fraudulent PhDs as well. So it is important to assess things.
Yeah, thank you very much for the interesting talks. My name is Wolf Dümpelmann. I'm from Basel area and here member of the Public-Private Innovation Agency. So it was very interesting. And I would like to ask a bit more provocative question. You mentioned that networking is very cost efficient. You also said that startups, companies value also the connections very much. So how do you, let's say, find the right equilibrium between the funding, the fuel into the project, and your own efforts or financial efforts into this networking activities? Because there are two different activities.
I think that people value networking only after they've done it. Most companies start off wanting money to do what they want to do, and it's a balance between, one of the things we learned very early on was to turn our briefing meetings about new competitions into networking meetings so that people would come because they thought they'd get an instruction on how to get money. What they met was lots of other people they could work with. We got devious, we had to, because it's very difficult when you start off on anything. I mean, when we set up a government agency, we had no idea what to do. We learned on the job, and it's the same for a startup or a new project or whatever. So you make your best shot, and you have to continually stop and think, what do I need to do the next shot? So, about 20% of our money goes into networking, but actually a lot of the other stuff is predicated on networking. The innovation vouchers, for example, is £5,000 to take time off from the day job and go and talk to someone you wouldn't normally talk to in a university, in a design agency, whatever. I mean, it's all about trying to get people. I mean, if it works right, they do it themselves. That was the thing. But it's just a really difficult balance. And I've been gone 18 months. They may well have changed it. I don't know.
Any other question?
I was wondering if you could comment on your company culture and what things you do to maintain it.
Okay, I suppose this comes back a little bit to what you said about trying to get staff. So in Ireland, we're competing with Google, Facebook, huge companies that offer big salaries. And it's really difficult to compete with those. And even when I go to the recruiters and say we want a new person, you're competing against not only the big companies where a lot of graduates want to go to work, but you're also competing with, they have health insurance or they have a car or whatever. So that's really difficult. So we tend to have to offer slightly higher salaries to get some of these people. But one of the key things that attracts a lot of these people is flexibility. And so in terms of company culture, that's where we win, or at least try to win, and we try and be flexible. So, I have one employee, for example, who has 2 kids, and he and his wife, who's a nurse, have to manage how the kids are picked up and creches and all those kind of things. But he is an absolutely brilliant scientist, and he's great in the lab. So in terms of accommodating people, I think that's one of the things that we have to do as a small company in order to get good staff. And they appreciate that. They appreciate it a lot. You're seeing more and more of that in companies all the time now. So I think that's probably not going to keep staff for long. So it's going to be more difficult again. But I trust my staff completely. So if they say, Vivienne, I need to work from home today for half the day, is that okay? It's fine. I know they'll do it. It's okay. I don't have an issue with that. So in terms of culture, it's built on trust and flexibility with the staff.
If I could just add to that, I mean, I've had the honour of seeing as many thousands of companies over the last few years, and I'm sparing Vivienne's blushes. I can tell you it's entirely down to the character of the CEO that makes a company work or not. And you can always tell. And actually, in just what she said, she encapsulated many of the right attitudes, like trust and belief and things like that. That's what differentiates a good company. The CEO is the thing that determines the culture. And as I mean, one of Google's better sayings I like is that culture eats process for breakfast. If you have a good culture, you can do almost anything.
In our situation, we have some special situation that concerns to our history. Tetec was built up in a scientific framework, in a hospital, in a laboratory. Our CEO is a physician and was doing research in the laboratory, in the clinic, and then has the idea, that's it, and then begins to work. So at the very early time of Tetec, we searched for people, or we looked for people more on the scientific perspective. So we need really enthusiastic scientific people which support the preclinical development of the product. Now we are in a completely other environment. We are now in an environment of a pharmaceutical company which achieves central market approval that is completely different to that scientific framework. But the most important thing, and that is for us when we look for people, the most important thing, that we can have the trust that the people will stay with us. When the people work in our company, they summarize special experience, really special experience. And in most of the cases, they summarize that experience that is exactly needed to that time point on his role. And when we lose this people, we lose the experience, and we sometimes have the situation that we cannot continue with different projects. So this is one really important point, and that concerns too that we as a company have to provide flexible models for managing the family, for managing the life. Also doing attractive offers for a work-life balance. The people need to understand that we are not only a company where they work, we are a partner of their life. We support their life, they support our life from the company to help us to achieve our aims. And finally, and that is very important in Germany, I don't know the situation in other countries really in detail, but due to the fact that we are a shared company, a small shared company of a big company, we have really safe situations for the employees. So the people can trust that the company will exist in the future. We are not one of those companies with our seed financed or other finance organs. I think this is a very important point for an employee when they screen the company Tetec to make the decisions to come to us or to avoid us.
Any other?
Hello, my name is Alex Secaldi from ETPN. I would like to have a comment from Vivienne Williams. Do you think it would be possible that you have developed all the maybe Plan B and Plan C applications of your material at the very beginning? And could you have a comment about the innovative design management that you have to have after the move from the hematologic application?
So the question is have we already developed the applications,
No,
or should we have developed them at the start?
Maybe not should you, but was it possible in your thing?
Was it possible? Probably not, actually. And the truth is that there's not really any portable device on the market for testing yeast at the beer tap right now. So from that point of view, we probably couldn't have benchmarked it against anything in that area. So probably not. In fact, we didn't choose. We ended up validating it in quite a tricky area, which is using blood. Blood is a really difficult sample to work with. And by virtue of the fact that we went down that line and validated it in that process, it actually resulted in a really robust device that was then very easy for us to validate in other areas. So, you know, the hematology business is very well established. As I mentioned, it's a very mature market with lots of devices. Now, they're not as sensitive as our device, or they can't do as much as our device in terms of, say, viability studies and you know, going into actually inside the cell and looking at the cell in more detail. So we have more potential to develop the device for more applications, but I suppose it was a great area for us to validate because it was so mature, it was so established, and there were so many devices there to choose from that we could benchmark against. We chose one of the leading, obviously, devices, which was the Sysmex device, and then in terms of a lab-based instrument, we chose the BD Acuri. We also have the Faxcanto in our lab as well. So, but those devices, if anybody's familiar with the Acuri device, the Acuri came out with a low-cost flow cytometer to compete with the classic BD flow cytometers. And when they developed it, they were targeting at somewhere between $30,000 to $60,000, whereas classically, you bought a flow cytometer for $100,000 to $200,000. After many years of developing the device in that area, they ended up being bought by BD for, I think, about $170 million, because they totally undercut them in the market. So it was important for us to pick a really popular device to benchmark ours against as well, in terms of lab-based instrument that was very sensitive. So you could argue that, yeah, we could have gone another route to begin with, but you must remember we were involved in a European Commission project to validate it for that particular area. And, you know, our roots were in cell biology and in hematology and thrombosis and so on. So for us, it made sense to go that area, or to go that route. But in the end, it's a difficult market to crack. Really difficult, and it's diagnostics, which is not what we've done before. We've been research-based, research tool, instrument-based. So from that point of view, it's a difficult leap to get across there, and we couldn't do it alone. We need to do it with a partner, and we're still talking to those partners, and we have some exciting opportunities which could develop in the next 6 to 12 months, but it's going to take time. You know, it's not going to happen overnight. So in the meantime, you're going to be sure I'm going to sell it for something. Okay. Absolutely.
Yeah, could I add a point which cuts across a couple of points been raised from the floor here? And people should understand, I guess, that SME cultures and academic cultures are quite distinct. And you can get problems where you have an SME really within a university setup, because the university applies one set of cultures whilst the SMEs what needs and has a separate different cultures as well. So that can cause major problems as well, particularly if, as often happens, the SME has a controlling influence from academia with a completely different culture.
Thank you, Mike. Any other question? If not, maybe I would, before we close the session, I would just like to remind you that I have presented in the introduction slides that basically the first, the Translation Advisory Board being established by ETPN, of course, is based on the very successful experience of Innovate UK, presented by David. And then we are very honored having David on board of this tab, and the same with Mike Eaton. And so I would strongly recommend you, and please let it know to all your partners, that the Translation Advisory Board will publish very soon, in the coming days, I hope, the first call for application for this, let's say, coaching, or let's say, what is the correct word for that? Let's say advice or knowledge share. So that means applicants, whether coming from academia or from SMEs, will have the possibility to apply with your, let's say, project for translation or product development. And you will have the possibility to apply to this board, and then, so there will be a first selection on paper, and then 2 hours discussion with the board of experts will be offered at the next General Assembly of ETPN in October in Dublin. And so just keep a look on the ETPN website, and because this will be a unique opportunity. Of course, it will be repeated. We will have probably several calls per year over several years, but it's something which is totally new. It is a European initiative, so Innovate UK is of course restricted to the UK applicants, and it will be specific to nanomedicine. That means because the experts are not. They are not all coming from nanomedicine, but they have an experience in areas which is useful for nanomedicine development. And so before closing, so I would like to thank very much all the speakers for your very useful contribution. I was very impressed, let's say, by the work done, let's say, with different routes, but always impressing. And I would like to thank you for your patience to stay until the very last moment of the CLINAM 2015. And anyway, if you have any question about translation, any question about the speakers, you can contact ETPN or ETPN Secretariat in the coming days, weeks, and months. Thank you very much, and now we can close the session. Thank you.